High in the Cascades, Daniel Cooper heard a metallic cry cut through the rain. Following the sound, he found it. A bobcat kitten, trapped in fresh steel jaws, the storm beating down as if time itself were running out. In that moment, Daniel snapped his hiking pole, pried the trap open, and pressed the trembling life against his chest, a choice that would ignite a battle with the law, his community, and even his own conscience.
Oh, you poor thing.
Where are you watching from? Comment your city or country below, and if this moment grips your heart, like and subscribe for more true stories of courage, healing, and hope. The sound didn't belong to a Saturday in the Cascades. It knifed through the lodgepole pines, thin, metallic, urgent, like a wire pulled too tight and snapping. Daniel Cooper stopped mid-step on the slick trail, one hiking pole hovering over a patch of moss. Somewhere below, water rushed cold and fast over rock. Farther off, a semi growled along the highway, its low thunder rolling up the valley and falling away. Rain had left the world rinsed clean, wet bark shining, air heavy with sap and soil, a crow stitching black against a sky of pewter. He waited, listening past his own breath. There it was again. Not birdsong, not coyote. A cry with edges on it. He moved down through sword ferns and salal, his boots sinking and releasing, the way the ground holds a man and then lets him go. This was supposed to be his quiet day, shoot winter light catching on ice glassing the creek, fill a few cards for the kids he taught at the community college on Mondays, be the man who noticed things other people missed. Most weekends were like that. Solitude, a thermos, a camera, and his stubborn ritual of walking until his mind smoothed out. But some cries won't let you pass. He found the trap first. It gleamed the way cheap metal does when it's new, unnatural, square-jawed, half-hidden under boughs someone had pulled over it, like a child trying to hide a mess. The chain bit into damp soil. The smell of cold iron sat there, flat and bitter. Daniel's stomach tightened. Illegal, he thought. Whoever set it knew better. He scanned the duff, fresh boot prints, oil on the dirt, diesel, maybe, the faint breath of it still hanging as if a machine had coughed nearby and left. The hair on his arms rose. He wasn't alone a few hours ago. Maybe he wasn't alone now. The cry came again, closer, with that awful, raw tremor small throats make when fear runs hot. Daniel stepped around a pile of downed branches and saw it. A bobcat kitten, no bigger than a football, fur matted to ribby sides, left hind leg caught in the steel jaws. The animal thrashed at his approach with a speed that didn't match its size. Front paws raking air, ears flat, eyes the gold of old coins. When the jaws clanked, that sound went through him as if the trap had closed on his own bones. He went perfectly still. Once, years ago, he'd tried to rescue a red-tailed hawk, tangled in baling twine along a fence. He remembered the heat of its body against his chest, the shock of its heart against his palm, the bright intelligence in its dark eye, and the way the life went out of it anyway, slow and final, because he'd been clumsy and late. That failure lived under his ribs like a shard. He could feel it now, trying to talk him out of trying again. You'll make it worse. You don't have the right tools. Walk on, call someone, let them be responsible. He took a breath that hurt going in. Not this time, he said into the trees. Not to the kitten. Just to the old fear that dressed up as caution. He snapped the hiking pole in two against the trunk of a dug fir, once, twice, and used the sections as a crude spreader wedging one under the trap's lower jaw. The kitten exploded at the movement, teeth flashing. Daniel slid his jacket off one arm and tossed it over the small body, a quick, practiced drape he remembered from a wildlife clinic demo years back. The fabric quivered with the kitten's breath, frantic, fast. He spoke then, but not words. Just a low, steadying sound his throat found on its own, the way you talk to a horse in a narrow trailer, or to your own heartbeat in an MRI tube. The trap was new and stiff. The spring fought him like a living thing, metal grinding against metal. He dug his boots in, leaned with his weight, felt the hinge give a fraction, then another. His hands burned where the cold bit through. Rain began again, thin needles pricking the nape of his neck. "Come on," he said, to the steel, to himself, to time. When the jaw finally relaxed enough, he slid the jacket and kitten sideways, the trapped leg pulling free with a wet tremor that punched his gut. He let the jaw snap, and the sound cracked like a starter pistol, too loud for those quiet trees. He kept the jacket around the kitten, shaping it into a sling, and for a moment just listened. The creak, the rain, his pulse, the small, arrhythmic panting inside the bundle pressed to his chest. The leg was wrong, swollen, skin broken, a ring of bruised fur pressed into a flat ribbon where the jaw had bitten. He inhaled through his teeth. If bone is crushed, if vessels are done, if shock wins. But thinking like that was a way to back away while still pretending to care. The only move was forward. He looked once more at the prints around the trap. They pointed toward a game trail and a break in the brush that led downhill. Whoever set it might be watching. That thought was the flint that struck spark under everything else. Daniel kicked dirt and leaves over the trap until it was ugly and invisible. He lifted his camera bag, dumped lenses into the top of his pack, and lowered the jacketed bundle into the bag's padded gut. The kitten's ears twitched under the fabric. He saw the shape of one small paw flex, claws like little ivory commas. Halfway up the slope, the world reminded him it was winter. The trail pitched steeper. His thighs burned. A bald patch of clay sent his boots skidding. He caught himself with a hand against a wooden stump that gave under his weight and showered him with cold bark. Somewhere, the crow he'd seen earlier threw its voice like a jeer. He grinned at the absurdity of the impulse. To react, to answer. Then he did answer, but not aloud. He set his jaw and climbed. He reached the logging road by the old survey stake where he always parked, slid the camera bag onto the passenger seat of his truck, and turned the heater on full. The kitten shuddered at the sudden rush of warm air. The jacket lifted and settled. Daniel drove the 10 rutted minutes to his cabin, a square of cedar and tin roof tucked behind a stand of alder, like a secret he kept from the highway. The place had been his for 9 years, just long enough to learn which window the morning light favored, and just long enough to develop the superstition that the stove only lit on the second match when he needed luck. He carried the camera bag to the couch, knelt on the rug that still remembered last night's wood smoke, and eased the jacket open. Golden eyes blinked at the dim warmth. The kitten made a sound like a tiny engine that can't decide whether to start or die out. Daniel wrapped a clean t-shirt around the injured leg, soft and loose, to keep the kitten from tearing at it. He set a shallow enamel dish on the floor and poured a bit of warm water in. The kitten didn't move toward it. Shock had taken the wheel, and shock wasn't letting go yet. He stacked kindling and split wood into the stove and struck his second match. The flame caught stubborn, Then, with a small, decisive whoomph, as if the room itself had taken a breath. Heat began to move in slow circles, touching his cheeks, his fingers, the t-shirt bandage, the soft ear that flicked once and then lay still. He glanced at his phone on the counter, at the single bar of service that came and went like a shy animal. He could call Hannah Miller, he would maybe purr, when the kitten's breathing evened out and the shaking slowed, when this fragile life felt less like a coin flipping as it fell. For now he sat with his back against the couch, the camera bag open beside him, jacket folded like a shelter over a wild thing that had every reason to hate him and every reason to go on living. Out in the trees, rain took another run at the roof. The highway hummed and faded. The stove ticked as metal expanded into warmth. Daniel exhaled and let the room tell him the only story it had. You brought something broken home. Now hold your ground. If you've ever heard a single sound change a life, you know this feeling. Where are you listening from? Drop your city below and stay with me as we step deeper into these woods. The kitten was alive, but barely clinging to it. Daniel placed the camera bag on the couch, pulled his jacket free, and the small trembling body uncoiled like a spring that had lost its tension. Golden eyes glared at him, not with gratitude but with defiance, and in that instant he knew this was no house cat to be tamed. This was a creature that came from storms and stone, carved by a wilderness that did not forgive. He poured a shallow dish of water, nudged it close. The kitten hissed, back arched, one paw swiping with surprising ferocity for something so slight. Its injured leg gave out mid-swipe, and it tumbled sideways, scrambling to hide beneath the couch. Daniel crouched, listening to the rasp of its breath, the furious rhythm of claws on wood. He thought of the trap again, the clean bite of steel, the way the animal had fought even as the jaws had crushed bone. If it could survive that, it could survive him. Still, his arms stung with new scratches, blood beading along pale lines like thin rivers. That night, he lit the stove and left the door open for the warmth to drift. He settled into the old leather chair with his field journal spread on his knees, pen in hand, though he barely wrote a line. He let the sound of the fire fill the room, each crackle a fragile bridge across the silence. Outside, rain ticked the tin roof in a steady rhythm, as though reminding him that time was moving, whether he acted or not. Hours later, he heard a small shuffle. A shadow slipped from beneath the couch. The kitten, limping but upright, sniffed the air. Its ribs rose and fell like bellows. Daniel didn't move, not even when the creature edged toward the dish of water. It lapped once, twice, then hissed again, as if ashamed of its own need. Retreat came quick, but Daniel had seen it, the smallest crack in its wall. By morning, the cabin was cold again. Daniel brewed coffee, the scent of bitterness cutting through the damp air, and called the only person he trusted with this, Dr. Hannah Miller. She had patched up raptors and foxes, deer struck by cars, even a cougar once. She was also his oldest friend, and the one person unafraid to tell him when he was being reckless. "You found what?" she said when the call finally connected. "A bobcat kitten, caught in a trap. I got it out. The leg's bad, Hannah. Real bad." Her sigh crackled down the line. "Daniel, listen carefully. Bobcats don't become pets. At best, they tolerate us. You can keep it alive, maybe, but you can't keep it." "I'm not trying to keep it," he answered, though the words felt half true. "I just couldn't leave it there." Silence stretched. Then her voice softened. Do what you can for now. Warmth, fluids, milk replacement if it'll take it. But don't expect trust. That's not what this animal is built for. That evening he sat again by the fire, journal open, writing down every shift, the way the kitten's ears flicked at the stove's pop, the twitch of its tail before it bolted back to cover, the small sound it made like a broken whistle in the dark. He wrote the word Willow in the margin, without meaning to, and underlined it twice. A name, uninvited but stubborn. The second night was worse. Willow lashed out when he tried to clean the wound, teeth scraping the skin of his wrist. He wrapped her gently in a towel, murmuring nothing more than breath and patience. But she fought as if he were the trap itself. His arms bore fresh welts, his shirt shredded. He wondered if he was a fool, if Hannah was right, if this effort was only prolonging suffering. Yet just before dawn, when the cabin was a blur of shadows and the fire had sunk to coals, something shifted. Willow crawled from her hiding place, trembling, weak. Daniel had left a syringe with warm milk nearby, the kind used for orphaned raccoons. Her golden eyes met his, narrowed with suspicion but dulled by hunger. She leaned forward, teeth bared, then pressed her mouth to the syringe and drew in a slow, tentative sip. The sound of her swallowing was so faint, it could have been mistaken for the settling of the stove. But to Daniel, it was thunder. The first true sign that life still clung stubbornly inside her. He sat back in the chair, breath shaking, and let the relief wash through him. He knew then the fight had only begun, but for the first time in years, after too many regrets, he felt the possibility that he might not lose this one. By the end of the week, Daniel's cabin no longer felt like his alone. The air carried the scent of raw milk and antiseptic, and each night he found himself whispering more to the shadows than to the fire. Willow, he couldn't stop calling her that, was still all claws and suspicion, but she was alive, and that was its own small miracle. Her leg remained stiff, wrapped in clean cloth that needed changing every day. Daniel braced for battle each time, sliding leather gloves over his raw hands. Willow fought the towel he wrapped her in, biting through layers with a strength out of proportion to her size. But there were moments, fleeting as candle flames, when her eyes softened just enough for him to see fear rather than fury. One evening, he placed a strip of venison near the edge of her hiding spot, his hand steady, palm open. The fire cracked, his breathing slowed. Willow inched forward, tail flicking like a metronome. Her nose touched the meat, her eyes never leaving his. Then she took it, a swift strike, retreating a foot, but not vanishing entirely. Daniel felt the corner of his mouth lift. A start. Days bled into each other. Trust was built in splinters, the scrape of claws against wood, the way she'd edge closer to his chair before darting back, the first time she ate from his palm without drawing blood. Yet the wildness was always there, woven into her like thread you could never pull free. One night proved it. He'd fallen asleep with his journal on his chest, the fire fading to embers. A sudden weight crashed against him. Fur, claws, heat. Willow had launched herself from the arm of the couch, landing squarely on his shoulder. Her claws tore through his flannel, slicing the skin beneath. Instinct made him jerk, nearly throwing her off. But her growl froze him. It was low, guttural, vibrating the air between them. Her ears flattened, tail slashing in a rhythm older than memory. Daniel forced his body still, every muscle trembling. Slowly, he lifted one hand, not to grab her, but to set the journal aside. Easy. His voice was barely more than breath. Willow sprang off him, vanishing into the corner with a hiss that seemed to scrape the walls. Blood ran warm down his arm, but his chest shook with something that wasn't fear. It was understanding. From then on, he studied her like a language he'd never been taught. A twitching tail meant irritation. Ears back meant danger. A low, rumbling growl could be warning or defiance. He filled pages with notes, sketches, fragments of thought. She's not mine. She never will be. But maybe I can learn to stand close without shattering what she is. The balance between them was razor thin, and he knew it. Every step toward trust was shadowed by the reminder that this animal carried the wilderness in her marrow. One misstep, one careless move, and the fragile tether would snap. Yet despite the scratches and the sleepless nights, Daniel felt something stir in him, a pulse he hadn't felt in years. Redemption, maybe, or just the raw truth that some battles are worth the scars. The Cascades have a way of reminding men how small they are. That night, it came as a storm rolling over the ridge like a black tide. Wind howled through the trees, rattling shutters, bending Douglas firs until they moaned like old ships. Rain hammered the tin roof, each drop sharp as a nail. Inside, Daniel paced the cabin, Willow restless in the pen he'd built outside from scavenged boards and wire. He had told himself it was temporary, just until her legs strengthened. But as the storm thickened, guilt gnawed at him. The structure wasn't made for violence like this. He pulled on his boots, coat, and headlamp and stepped into the maelstrom. The beam cut through sheets of rain, catching the pen sagging in the wind. A crack split the night, the sound of timber giving way. Willow's cry tore through the storm, high and panicked. Daniel lunged forward, mud sucking at his boots, but a branch whipped across his face and dropped him to his knees. When he looked up, the pen was splintering, wire snapping free, the whole structure collapsing like a house of cards. Willow was gone. "Willow!" His voice was swallowed by thunder. He stumbled into the trees, headlamp jerking, mud spraying. Branches clawed his arms. Every shadow could have been her. Every rustle a false hope. He found tracks, a frantic scatter of paw prints leading into the undergrowth, only for the rain to blur them into nothing. He searched until his lungs burned, slipping down ravines slick with runoff, boots filling with icy water. A flash of lightning revealed a smear of fur caught on a bramble, then nothing but darkness again. He kept moving, calling her name until the syllables broke apart in his throat. Hours later, when exhaustion forced him to stop, he slumped against a tree trunk. The storm eased enough for the forest's darker truths to speak. Near a thicket, he found the remains of a rabbit, torn open, ribs glistening pale in his light. He crouched, staring at the mess of fur and bone. Relief struck first. Willow was alive, still hunting, still fighting. Then dread. She was alone in a wilderness full of traps, predators, and men who wouldn't hesitate to finish what that steel jaw had started. For 3 days he searched. By day he scanned ridges, calling, coaxing, cursing himself. By night he left food near the cabin porch, though rain and raccoons usually claimed it first. Sleep came in shallow bursts, each dream ending with golden eyes fading into the dark. On the 3rd morning, he woke to a sound he thought was part of a dream, claws scratching softly at the wooden porch. He rose, heart hammering, and pulled open the door. There she was, thin, soaked but upright. Willow stood with her fur plastered flat, eyes locked on him, those same eyes that had burned through the trap's shadow. Between her jaws, she held a snapped tree branch, ragged at the break. Whether it had caught in her teeth by accident or been carried with intent, Daniel would never know. But he saw it as a message, plain and silent. She had chosen to return. The storm had taken the pen, his sleep, and half his faith. Yet standing there in the doorway, rain dripping from the eaves, Daniel felt something return with her, something stronger than ownership, fiercer than pity. A fragile pact, sealed not with words, but with survival. Morning light spilled weakly through the cabin's windows, still tinted gray from the storm. Daniel was on his knees spreading a blanket for Willow near the stove when the crunch of tires on gravel drew his attention. Few people ever came this far up the mountain road. He wiped his hands on his jeans, stepped onto the porch, and saw the white state-issued pickup parked under dripping firs. Wildlife Officer Mark Stevens climbed out, broad-shouldered, his ranger's jacket dark with rain spots. He had the kind of steady eyes that took in everything without judgment, at least not right away. "Morning, Daniel," Stevens called, shutting the door with a heavy thud. "Mind if I take a look?" Daniel's stomach tightened. He didn't have to ask what Stevens wanted to see. He motioned toward the cabin. Willow had retreated beneath the table, her golden eyes glinting warily in the shadows. Stevens crouched, resting his hands on his knees. "Well, there she is. You know this is illegal, right? Keeping a bobcat, even an injured one, without clearance." Daniel's jaw worked. "I didn't plan it. Found her in a trap. Couldn't walk away." Stevens studied him, then the kitten. The silence stretched long enough for Willow to let out a low growl, her tail flicking once like punctuation. "Look," Stevens said, finally standing. "I'm not here to slap you with fines, yet, but I can't ignore this. Bobcats don't belong in living rooms. You're a smart man, Daniel. You know where this could go." Daniel's throat tightened. He pictured Willow's leg in that trap, her desperate eyes. "If you take her now, she won't make it. She's not ready." Stevens exhaled, scanning the ruined enclosure outside. The storm-splintered boards scattered across the clearing. "Maybe not, which is why I'm giving you an option." He paused, measuring the weight of his words. "There's a pilot program, state-sanctioned, focused on bobcat rehabilitation and controlled sanctuary release. We've been looking for someone local, someone stubborn enough to stick it out. You'd be under supervision, reporting everything, following strict rules. Or," his tone hardened, "you surrender her, today." The words landed like a gavel. Daniel's chest burned with memory. The red-tailed hawk he'd failed to save years ago. The helplessness that had stayed under his ribs ever since. He felt the old shame trying to pull him down again. But Willow's soft hiss under the table snapped him back. This wasn't about pride. It was about responsibility. "I'll do it," he said quietly. "I'll join." Stevens nodded, his face giving away nothing but a flicker of relief. "Then you'd better be ready. It won't be easy. Paperwork, training, inspections. And if she ever becomes a danger, you'll need to make the hard call. Understood?" Daniel swallowed hard. Understood. As Stevens walked back to his truck, Daniel glanced through the window at Willow. She hadn't moved from her corner, but her gaze followed him, sharp and unyielding. She wasn't a pet. She never would be soon. and maybe that was exactly why she mattered. The ultimatum had been delivered, but in Daniel's mind, it felt less like a threat and more like a chance, one last chance to get it right. Daniel's decision rippled through every corner of his life. The Rangers' ultimatum left no room for half measures. Either commit fully or let Willow be taken away. And so he made the choice that would change more than his own days. The first sacrifice came quickly. He opened the heavy trunk in his cabin, the one that smelled faintly of cedar and dust, and spread out the photographs that had defined his career. Mist curling above Crater Lake at dawn. An eagle mid-dive, talons sharp as hooks. Elk threading the snowbound meadows like ancient kings. He had guarded these prints as if they were part of his bones. Now, one by one, he packaged them in brown paper, sold them through collectors, and watched the funds trickle in. The money became land. 100 acres of scrubby, clear-cut, bordered by river and ridge, overlooked by skeptics but alive with potential. It was scarred, yes. Trees felled, soil eroded, but Daniel saw it as a canvas. Willow would not heal in a cage. She needed space wide enough for her wild heart. He worked dawn to dusk. He planted shrubs and saplings, dug trenches to guide runoff into clear pools, and hauled stones to shape artificial dens. Sweat carved paths down his back. His hands blistered and split. At night, he returned to the cabin. Willow perched on the windowsill like a silent overseer, her golden eyes following every move. She was gaining strength, the once crushed leg firming with new muscle. Some days she shadowed him to the property, testing each tree, climbing, leaping short distances until her paws touched down sure and steady. By midsummer, the land had begun to change. Stream beds glittered with minnows, grasses reached for the wind, and the first quail returned. Daniel walked the perimeter fence, high, reinforced, secure, and felt something bloom in his chest. This wasn't ownership. This was restoration. One evening, after hammering the last post into place, he stood on a ridge overlooking the sanctuary. Willow crouched beside him, tail curled low, ears flicking at the rustle of small prey in the brush. For a moment, she didn't look like the broken creature he'd carried in a camera bag. She looked like what she had always been meant to be: wild, whole, unclaimed. That night, Daniel opened his laptop and launched a bare-bones website. On the first page, he typed a single line: "Helping isn't the same as owning." He posted a photograph of Willow against the backdrop of her new home. Alert, fierce, unbowed. Within days, emails trickled in. Then donations. People who had never seen Oregon wrote that they wanted to help, to believe in something untamed and enduring. Willow became a symbol. Her story spread, shared on forums, whispered in town, even picked up by local media. Strangers called Daniel a guardian, though he never used the word himself. He was simply a man who had once failed and now was trying not to again. And in the quiet hours, when the stove crackled and the cabin smelled of cedar and smoke, Daniel would glance out the window. Willow's silhouette moved through moonlight, strong and unbroken. She lingered near him more often than she strayed, a reminder, perhaps, that while wildness cannot be owned, it sometimes chooses to stay close. At first, the donations and quiet support felt like a tide rising in Daniel's favor. But tides turn fast in small towns, especially when fear has more volume than facts. By autumn, the whispers had become louder than the applause. It started at the feed store. Two farmers spoke just loud enough for Daniel to hear while he loaded bags of grain into his truck. What happens when those cats get out? You think they'll stop at rabbits? Chickens, goats, maybe kids next. Their words hung in the air heavier than the sacks of feed. Daniel clenched his jaw, said nothing, but the seed had been planted. Soon others repeated it. At the diner, at the post office, in church parking lots. The sanctuary wasn't just Daniel's project anymore. It was a looming threat in their minds. Flyers appeared tacked to bulletin boards. Protect our families. Say no to wild predators in our backyard. At the center of the opposition stood Earl Thompson. Earl was a rancher with a back as bent as the fence posts he drove. A man who had lost more hens than he cared to count to foxes and stray dogs. To him, the idea of a bobcat sanctuary bordered on madness. He didn't need science or state programs to tell him predators belonged far from human homes. At the first community meeting, held in the fire hall with folding chairs scraping across the linoleum floor, Earl's voice rose above the rest. "Mark my words," he said, jabbing a finger in Daniel's direction. "One day this'll go wrong. And when it does, it won't be Daniel paying the price. It'll be us." Murmurs of agreement rolled through the crowd. Daniel stood, palms damp. "You're right to be cautious," he admitted, scanning the faces of neighbors he'd known for years. "But this isn't reckless. Willow's pen is reinforced steel. She wears a GPS collar. Every movement is tracked, every risk assessed. This isn't captivity, it's conservation." Some heads tilted, doubt softening slightly. A few farmers even nodded. But Earl's glare hardened. "Collars break. Fences fail. You think a wild cat knows the difference between your program and my coop?" The tension tightened like barbed wire strung too fast. Daniel invited anyone willing to visit the sanctuary. A week later, a group arrived. Skeptical faces framed by caps and scarves, boots sinking into the damp earth. He guided them through the enclosures, showed them the double gates, the monitoring stations, the quiet pools where quail now drank. Willow appeared at the edge of the trees, her golden eyes unblinking, her presence both a marvel and a warning. For some, that was enough. They saw the care, the science, the boundaries Daniel had built. They left with softened voices, promising to think it over. But Earl stayed behind, arms crossed, jaw tight. "Pretty show," he muttered. "But I don't buy it. Cats are cats, and cats kill." Daniel met his stare, steady but tired. "Maybe," he said. "But people kill too, Earl. The difference is whether we choose fear or balance." The rancher spat into the dirt, shook his head, and walked away. The conflict didn't end there. It simmered, feeding local headlines, sparking late-night radio debates. Conservation versus safety. Wild versus tame. Daniel versus the town. And through it all, Willow remained silent in the shadows of the sanctuary, unaware she had become both the hope and the threat shaping every human voice around her. The first sign came on a brittle November evening. Frost clung to the tall grass, and Daniel was making his rounds along the sanctuary fence when he spotted prints in the mud, larger, deeper than Willow's. A second bobcat had passed through. That night, the stillness of the valley shattered. A guttural snarl echoed through the trees, followed by the sharp scream of another cat. Daniel raced outside, flashlight cutting over the frosted field. His beam caught a blur of movement. Willow, fur bristling, face to face with a wild male. The stranger was massive, shoulders broad, eyes lit like embers. He stalked in a circle around Willow, every step measured, tail thrashing like a whip. Willow mirrored him, ears flat, her injured legs stiff but unyielding. The air vibrated with their growls, so primal that Daniel felt his skin tighten. "Shadow," he whispered, naming the wild Tom without thinking. The clash was sudden, an eruption of muscle and claws. They collided with a screech that split the night, bodies tumbling, teeth flashing in the beam of his light. Daniel's heart seized. His first instinct was to rush in, to drive Shadow away, to protect Willow from being torn apart. He took a step, then froze. Hannah's words echoed in his mind. "Bobcats don't become pets. At best, they tolerate us." This was their language, their law. If he interfered, he might save her body but shatter her spirit forever. So he stood rooted, every muscle screaming, as Willow clawed her way free and lashed out. Shadow struck again and again until Willow staggered back, blood staining her shoulder. She hissed, teeth bared, holding her ground. At last, Shadow broke off, pacing the perimeter, his golden eyes never leaving hers. Then, with a final snarl, he melted into the trees. Daniel rushed forward, knees sinking into the cold mud. Willow limped, her breath ragged, blood trickling down her fur. He reached out, but she growled low, warning him to keep his distance. She turned away, dragging herself into the sanctuary shadows. He let her go, helpless, but strangely proud. She was battered, but unbroken. For days, Shadow lingered. Daniel spotted him at dawn near the ridge, a dark silhouette against the pale sky. Sometimes he heard the low cough of his call at night, answered by Willow's sharp cry. At first, chaos reigned. Fights, stalking, Willow limping through the brush with fresh wounds. But slowly, something shifted. One cold morning, Daniel raised his camera lens and saw them together. Not close, but no longer enemies. Willow drank from the stream while Shadow prowled nearby. Later, he caught them pacing opposite sides of the fence, wary but tolerant. A fragile peace forged not in comfort, but in respect. Daniel lowered the camera, breath fogging the glass. Against every fear, every doubt, Willow had chosen her path, not domesticated, not dependent, but wild enough to stand toe-to-toe with the wilderness itself. And somehow, in the sharp silence between their snarls, Daniel felt vindicated. His restraint had given her what no human hand could. Still, he knew this was only the beginning. Shadow was not just a visitor. He was a harbinger of change, and the night no longer belonged to Daniel alone. Winter settled heavy on the sanctuary, snow softening the jagged scars of clear-cut land. Daniel rose each morning to the sound of silence layered over silence. No chainsaws, no trucks, only the hush of wind combing through furs. He carried his camera slung over one shoulder, a thermos of coffee in hand, and scanned for signs of Willow. She was never far, though she no longer lingered as closely as before. It was Hannah who noticed first. She had driven up the icy road in her old Subaru, hauling supplies Daniel couldn't easily get delivered. After walking the perimeter with him, she paused near a cluster of rocks where Willow liked to bask in sunlight. Willow stepped into view, slower than usual, her stride careful, her belly rounded. Hannah's eyes sharpened instantly. "Daniel," she said softly. "She's pregnant." The words seemed impossible at first. Daniel blinked, the cold air burning his lungs. "With Shadow?" Hannah nodded, crouching to observe the golden cat from a distance. That old injury didn't take away her future. She's carrying life. The revelation rippled through Daniel like a current. He had expected wounds, scars, and survival, but not this. Not new life born from wildness and pain. Weeks passed, each one taut with waiting. Daniel kept his distance, resisting the pull to interfere. Willow grew heavier, her movements slower, but her eyes burned just as fiercely. Shadow appeared more often, his silhouette a steady guardian at the tree line, neither tame nor hostile, simply present. One night in early spring, under a moon swollen with light, Daniel watched through his long lens as Willow disappeared into a den she had carved beneath the roots of a cedar. Hours crawled. Then, in the pale wash of dawn, she emerged curled around two tiny shapes pressed against her fur. Kittens. One male, one female, small bundles of breath and fur, mewling against the hush of morning. Their paws kneaded at Willow's belly, blind eyes closed to the world, yet alive, utterly alive. Daniel whispered into the cold air, Ash and Ember. Names born from fire and survival. Through the glass of his lens, he saw Willow's body curve around them, her shoulder still scarred from old battles, her gaze sharp as ever. She was no pet, no captive, no symbol for human comfort. She was a mother, fierce and unyielding. Daniel's chest swelled with something he couldn't quite name. Pride, yes. Relief. But more than that, redemption. He had once failed to save, failed to protect. Now he saw life multiply before him, untamed and enduring. He set the camera down, hands trembling. He would not intrude, not cross the fragile line between watcher and destroyer. All he could do was bear witness. That night, seated by the fire with his journal open, he wrote, "This is not my triumph. It is hers, and I am only here to see it, to learn from it." The wind rattled the eaves, and outside in the sanctuary, Willow's low purr rumbled through the earth, carrying the fragile song of new life into the dark. Spring melted into summer, and the sanctuary breathed with a rhythm all its own. Grasses swayed in the wind, quail darted in and out of the shrubs Daniel had planted, and the stream glimmered beneath the weight of trout fry. What once had been scarred land now pulsed with wildness. Willow thrived, her limp nearly gone, her eyes sharper than ever. Shadow lingered on the edges, less a threat now than a sentinel, and in their midst grew Ash and Ember, two bobcat kittens tumbling through underbrush, chasing beetles, and leaping after falling leaves. Daniel watched them from a distance, camera lens steady, heart unsteady. By the time the kittens were nearly grown, experts had taken notice. Wildlife biologists arrived, boots muddy, notebooks open, voices hushed with reverence. They spoke of reintroduction, of preparing Ash to return to the wild. His frame was long, his muscles coiled with energy, his instincts sharp. Ember, smaller and more cautious, stayed closer to Willow, her curious eyes often turning toward the fence line where Daniel stood. The day of Ash's release came under a sky stretched wide and blue. Daniel stood at the ridge, camera in hand, while the biologists fitted Ash with a tracking collar. Willow paced nearby, restless, aware of the shift in the air. When the gate swung open, Ash hesitated only a moment before bounding forward into the forest, his form swallowed by light and distance. Daniel's throat tightened, but pride steadied him. The wild had reclaimed what was always its own. Ember remained. She grew into a graceful cat, quick and curious, often seen by visiting schoolchildren from behind reinforced glass at the education center Daniel had built beside the sanctuary. She became the bridge between wild and human, close enough for learning, distant enough to keep her dignity. The sanctuary itself grew. What began with one injured kitten became a center for conservation and research. Donations poured in, volunteers offered their hands, and classrooms from across the state arranged field trips. Children pressed their noses to observation windows, gasping when Willow emerged from the shadows, her golden eyes a living reminder that wildness still existed. One evening, in a packed university hall, Daniel stood before an audience. Slides flickered behind him, images of Willow in the snow, of ash vanishing into the pines, of Ember crouched on a rock beneath moonlight. His voice carried the weight of years and scars, but it was steady. "We never own nature," he told them. "We walk beside it, we learn from it, and we let it remain what it was always meant to be." The words hung in the air, more than a lesson, an offering. The applause that followed felt distant, almost unimportant. What mattered was outside, where the sanctuary pulsed with life that asked for nothing but space to endure. Later that night, standing alone at the ridge, Daniel heard it. The low, haunting call of a bobcat drifting from the hills. Perhaps shadow. Perhaps ash. Perhaps just the voice of wildness itself echoing back to him. Daniel closed his eyes, the sound filling him with equal parts ache and wonder. The journey had never been about saving a kitten. It had been about finding his place in a world that could break you and still remind you what was worth protecting. And as the call faded into the dark, he knew the wild would always endure. Long after him, long after fences, long after firelight. Some stories don't end with fireworks. They end with a quiet truth that lingers long after the last word. Willow, shadow, ash, ember. Each of them carried a lesson Daniel could never have written in his journal alone. That wildness doesn't ask for permission, and healing doesn't always look like what we expect. Redemption isn't about undoing the past. It's about choosing differently the next time, even when your hands still carry the scars. Daniel had once failed, but by holding his ground, by giving space instead of control, he learned what every living thing whispers if you listen closely enough. Life is meant to be free, even if freedom comes with risk. And maybe that's something for all of us. How many times have we tried to hold on too tightly, to people, to memories, to comfort, when the truest act of love is simply letting them remain what they were always meant to be? Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to let go of something you loved, not because you wanted to, but because it was the right thing? Share your story in the comments below. I promise you'll find others here who understand. If this journey with Willow and her family touched you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Every story we share is a reminder that wildness still lives among us, and that by listening, by caring, we become part of it. And who knows? Maybe the next call drifting from the hills isn't just for Daniel. Maybe it's for all of us.